Hello and welcome to the SpaceChem Tournament 2020 Round 4 results video. Today I've got I 12345 IEEE, Biggie Mac
Hi.
42,
Hello.
and Binky.
Hello.
And I am Rexkix. Before we go on, let me thank the tournament hosts. RPO did all the puzzles. We're really grateful for him. Without him, we wouldn't have a tournament. And 12345 IEEE, who's here, and is receiving all the puzzles, is posting all the puzzles, is um, crunching all the numbers, and without him, we wouldn't have a tournament either. Um, I know both of them would rather be playing in the tournament, and we really appreciate their sacrifice so we can have a tournament to play in. Thank you, guys. The puzzle for round 4 is called Recombinato, and Binky's going to describe it. Go ahead, Binky.
Yep. So for the inputs, we have a oxygen atom, a nitrogen atom bonded to a hydrogen, and a carbon bonded to two hydrogens. The thing to note with these is that all three of them have the same total atomic number, basically, of 8. So nitrogen having one hydrogen bonded to it has a weight of 7 plus 1 is 8. Carbon is 6 plus 2 hydrogens is 8. So they can all be sort of interchanged using the fuses and uh, fission lasers on the board. And the target is the aminomethane ether,
Yeah, ether, I think.
aminoethane ether, which is a polymer of all three of the inputs twice in a stack. And it being 6 stacks makes it very easy to use the bonders to stack them in and bring them down without actually crashing, as would be the case if there were 8 of them there. You'll see that used in some of the solutions.
I'll note that we have 2 sensors, 2 fusion lasers, and 2 splitters, 2 fission lasers. These are only possible in the community edition of the game, which is basically a theme of the tournament. Only things that we couldn't do before the community edition existed. So that's something that's fun. Oh, yeah, our metric. Go ahead, Binky.
So the metric this round is symbols minus 10. So the idea of having the minus 10 is obviously to make the distribution a little bit more split, I guess, between the highest and lowest, because it's a simple solution. It's kind of expected for the number of symbols to be quite similar between the solutions, so it just makes the final scoring a little bit more distributed.
Number 26 is by Bavarium, and Biggie's going to introduce this one. Let's go.
Yeah, so I think this is Bavarium's first submission to the tournament, and it seems to be I've solved the puzzle and that's my goal. Not necessarily quite as much I am going to win the symbols metric, but they got a solution out and that's pretty great to see. Now, what is their approach actually doing? So they're going to be trying to make an oxygen, then trying to make a hydrogen-nitrogen pair, and then they'll try to make CHC or HCH. And in all the cases, if the input that they grab doesn't match what they are looking for, it'll be accumulated into a little fuser waste ball in the middle.
Okay.
Now, because of the position that they decided to make their bonding, they are setting aside a trio, one of each input, and rotating it and setting off to the corner instead of building a long stick. And that probably costs them quite a few symbols to choose this way, but that means that after this is all done, they pick them up, they bond the 2 pieces together, and their waste ball gets thrown into a bonder that creates a waste chain down in the bottom left corner. Now, it's a very fortunate coincidence that every multiple of 8 can bond twice. So when you have multiples of 8 that are made from fusing together some number of inputs that are all decided not to be part of your outputs, you can create a waste stick that bonds together and doesn't ever have a noble gas cause it to crash into the other atoms instead of behave as you expect. So they get away with this lucky coincidence, and the waste that comes out depends on how the random input stream works. It could be any multiple of 8, depending on how many atoms didn't fit their goal while they were trying to grab an O, grab an NH, grab a C. Now they're willing to do fusion, but they have no use for the splitters. You see the splitters in the top right, top left aren't used, so they're only allowed to proceed basically from bottom to top in the inputs. They can turn CHC or HCH into anything. HN can turn into itself or O, and O is only ever going to be viewed as an oxygen.
Okay, well, let's go a little bit faster.
The Waldo logic to be able to serve this approach does take up a lot of space and a lot of symbols. So it is not surprising to see this one at the highest end of the symbols among the submissions. But to solve this puzzle and design an approach that works, even if it's not the most clean approach, does earn them points in the tournament. So congrats, Bavarium. You've joined. You've made a solution to a non-trivial puzzle.
Nice work. Okay, let's let it run to...
I was going to say, the way that they do one half and rotate it and put it down to the side seems to be so that when they're building the second half, they can still have the paths of the Waldos going above the second half, because if the second half was built higher, they wouldn't be able to get the Waldos where they want them to go by the looks of it. So they have to rotate the first one to get it lower to be able to build the first one. Sorry, build the second one, and then put them together.
True. It's also not obvious from the first, but it's much more obvious once they're building outputs 9 and 10 that they need to save that row on the bottom for their waste stick.
Yeah.
And I note that they carefully output the atom before they add to the waste stick, so they don't push it off to the edge.
Exactly, yep.
Okay, well, we're almost done. Let's let it finish. Or we'll run a little faster. And here's the last output.
Here's the max length, most colorful waste stick I think we see in this whole video. So congrats on having a very colorful rainbow of 8N atoms.
Yes. And there we are. Bavarium's solution has 104 symbols, giving a metric of 94 and a score of 1.915. Nice work and welcome to the tournament, Bavarium. 25th solution is by huetobi, and IEEE is going to explain it. Here, let's go watch it.
Sure. So this has some kind of similarities with the previous one, where we have the construction of an half polymer, then the other half polymer, and then a final bonding of the two halves. You can see that by seeing that the two bonders on the right are on the middle. So you can't build it monomer by monomer, but you are going to build it by chaining together two half polymers. This is usually a good approach for cycles on these kind of puzzles. It is not the best for symbols usually, and in fact we see that this solution is a bit heavy. So now that we have 3 CHH, we see some magic. So the thing is bonded and refused correctly, and so from the 3 sticks of CHH we've done an half polymer. And when we do it again, we can take a look at the fusion dance on the left, where the red and blue Waldo alternate paths and use most of the split fusing facilities to build a COH from whatever input. And this is kind of heavy because you can see red doing a lot of back and forth, and so is blue. And this is because building a CHH is pretty significant process. I mean, building an oxygen is easy, but transforming everything into CHH is pretty hard. This is the second half, so we see red, and we see blue controlling the fusion, and red just moving around and passing everything by the fuser. And now, sensor triggers, blue bonds up and deposits. Here we go, done the first, and this repeats. As I mentioned before, he uses both sensors, but not to detect the inputs, but to handle which part of the half molecule is doing. So this is a pretty uncommon use. You see red here using a sensor to detect that he has done enough polymer, and then blue later uses the sensor to detect that he needs to output. And well, this is a pretty unexpected use of all these sensors in a puzzle that has random inputs, so you would expect the sensor to be used on the input side. And the fusing is pretty nice, I've got to say. So these CHH sticks get here we see it here, get turned into enough polymer. We are pretty efficient. Double back on red. I mean, blue has a very long path to do the fusion, but this doesn't really impede on the solution because this is the fastest solution of a bunch at 2,000 cycles and a little bit. Because the two Waldos do a lot of the boring work on the left is done in parallel by the two Waldos. So the long path on the right doesn't really matter much because you do this fuse splitting for each monomer. So once you parallelize that is the biggest bandwidth. This wig is about symbols, so it doesn't really matter that much. It just makes it nicer to watch.
Yeah, agreed. Very nice to watch.
So I think we can let this run to the end.
Okay. And huetobi gets uses 75 symbols for a metric of 65 and gets a score of 2.849. huetobi is new to the tournament too, and welcome. Yeah. Nice job, huetobi. Flexo comes in at 24th place, and Binky's going to explain this one. Go ahead, Binky.
Cool. So the way that Flexo does this is, first of all, any input that comes in is fused together into an oxygen, and each one is bonded together into an oxygen stick. So just watch that happen.
Okay, there's two. And here comes the third.
And then the third one. And here, there is some splitting and fusion magic going on to turn the middle one into nitrogen, using that helium and a hydrogen. Then we move it over, blue comes in, drops hydrogen off, fuses it together to the carbon, and then they start bonding the hydrogens into the final product. The interesting thing to note here is that both of the Waldos repeat a path, but each time they do something slightly different. So you see the red one here, fusing them together to make the nitrogen, just following the same path. And then the blue one here, it repeats a path twice. And the way it rotates the half output and drops it off on the right-hand side allows the blue one to come round afterwards, holding the hydrogen over the fuse without it actually fusing to the final molecule. So the last two paths over just there, we can bring it over the same path and then just drop it straight into the bond plus, which saves having a second path, which obviously saves the symbols.
And here he's finishing. Nice. I love that rotate at the end.
Yeah, it's a satisfying rotate.
Yeah, and let's go watch this to completion. Let's watch a couple more at this speed.
It's convenient that it's possible to go from oxygen, it's possible to go from oxygen all the way to the 3-stick without breaking any bonds. So every bond that is already made in its center spine doesn't have to be reformed.
Yeah, it doesn't make any noble gases or anything.
Yeah. And there we go. And Flexo gets uses 59 symbols for a metric of 49 and a score of 3.833. Next solution is by RPO. He's our tournament host, so he gets no score. No score for RPO. Let's go take a look at this one. IEEE is going to explain it.
Yeah, so this follows a pattern that we will see repeated in many other solutions. Some general input landing is is used. Like in this case, he converts everything to carbon and helium, and then a certain logic is followed depending on which monomer in which monomer are we building. The logic is controlled by a set of 3 counters. We can see them on the fourth column for red below the sensor, and in the second row for blue on the right side. These counters control the path the Waldos follow, and they transform the input, that is basically carbon neon, into the needed monomer. We can watch the construction of the CHH monomer like this. So we see he makes a carbon neon, and then the sensors trigger. And so here we see blue splitting the neon, bringing one hydrogen on the right, the other one on the left, bonding and getting it done. Red brings it down the molecule, and it will do this for every monomer. So here the same thing happens. The input is different, but it's transformed into carbon-helium anyway. And we see that blue follows a different path, fuses the helium in, and we get oxygen. The last one, the nitrogen monomer, we see the usual input transformation. And then we see the blue goes back to fuse one hydrogen and then brings the other one on the left. And it's done. If we wait a bit, we can see the output mechanism. The next monomer it is. So the output mechanism is triggered by the bottom sensor that senses that our molecule is now 6 monomers long. And then the sensor is trigged, and red, instead of grabbing and pulling down, it just outputs. The thing is synced on the bottom left, so even if the paths are radically different between each monomer, the length stays the same. So here is it. This doesn't make halves, so it builds a polymer efficiently by bonding monomer one on top of the others. It starts on the third row, so it needs a little bit of special handling on the output. It can't just bring it down and then think later about whether it needs to output, and that is something that would save the symbol if it's done that way. But he has to start on the third row because he has a lot of logic going on the initial rows and can't put stuff more on top. So yeah, we can watch it run, and we would see this theme of handling the inputs all in the same way, and then doing stuff modulus 3 in many other solutions.
Okay, let's go a little faster.
Yeah. Yeah, the weak point here is, if you want, that the wall handling is kind of heavy. The transforming everything into carbon neon is nice when you have to do a carbon hydrogen, but it is a lot of work if you just needed an oxygen. So you actually had it done much before, and we will see solutions that can skip some extra work if they don't need it, by some smarter counting before doing work.
Okay.
I say go max speed.
And here we go. And as I said, RPO gets uses 57 symbols for a metric of 47. For no score, RPO can't get a score because you're a tournament host. Thank you, though, RPO, and thank you for making these puzzles. They're a lot of fun to play. Next solution is by McCrush in 23rd place, and Binky's going to explain it.
Yeah, so in this solution we see a sensor over the input zone, and this is going to be a solution which looks for the correct next piece for the puzzle, and if it doesn't find it, it's going to start fusing it. And we see blue right now is going over a Rutherfordium sensor, that is element 104, which happens to be the largest multiple of 8 which you can create in SpaceChem. That is to handle all of the pieces that don't fit where they need to go. So for example, this next this next input is a carbon, you just already added carbon to the chain, so the thing you would put next is a nitrogen. Carbon doesn't work, so you fuse it, you add it into this waste ball, and once that waste ball reaches Rutherfordium, it's going to start making a waste stick. The tactic we can see in the solution, if you speed it up a little bit, is wall sensors. So red's path is going to go hang out on a wall, and once the actual atom on that sensor matches what you expect it to be, it grabs, moves it down, and adds it to the output. And you can see that there are 3 grab points. The one in the middle is unique to oxygen, the one on the left is present in nitrogen, and the one on the right is present in carbon.
Okay. And watch that
And
whole output.
it's also kind of convenient that with 2 sensors, you get to have a lot more opportunities to use the sensed symbols. And in this case, the sensor that is checking for Rutherfordium is also checking for whether or not the output is completed at length 6. So when it finishes a bond and drop, blue will take a small detour if it's placed a hydrogen over that sensor and just quickly output. That's a way to avoid having to count to 6, which is convenient.
Okay.
Let's watch it a little faster to watch the waste stick grow, because I think that kind of requires putting it at speed 3.
Yeah, let's go.
So here we have our first atom of Rutherfordium, and there's the next one. Every time the atom which is added can't fuse, you'd want to get that atom out of the way, otherwise you would cause a collision in your solution, so that's why Rutherfordium is moved aside. And the size of this waste stick is calibrated such that you can get 8 outputs without crashing, but if you were to ask for more outputs, I'm not sure whether you can get 10 outputs without crashing. I'm not sure if you were to ask for 11 if it would immediately crash or if it would still keep going until 12.
No, we won't find out, so.
Yeah, there's not a quick, easy way to verify that, but it fits, and getting to 10 outputs is all that this puzzle really requires.
And McCrush.
There's
gets.
56 symbols, but I have a quick, easy way to
Oh.
save 2 from that if you'd like to see.
Well, 2 free symbols. Let's go get them.
The top wall sensor nitrogen the red Waldo is always going to be traveling up when it reaches that point, so the up arrow is completely superfluous. Meanwhile, the carbon sensor, it's not always traveling up. The only reason for that is because the start points to the left. If you move the start to be below the grab and pointing up, then it also obeys the rule that it's always traveling up when it gets there. And so in this case, those 2 wall sensors behave the exact same now, but without needing 2 arrows underneath it, saving you 2 symbols, and you can verify that this still works.
And indeed it does.
There is one more symbol save.
Okay, well, let's go find it.
So on the output, on the blue towards the top right, you can move the sensor, the output, and the up arrow, and that would mean that you can get rid of the left arrow, since if you're putting it on a corner, for example, at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I think you should put it there, because you're never taking another atom to the right-hand side before that point.
So here?
Yep. And then the up arrow as well, and then that means you can get rid of the...
Okay, let's go see if this works. And it does. Nice.
It is, I think, 14 cycles slower, but this being a symbols solution, it's not really an issue. Oh, that's the problem. That means that you might be able to move the bomb plus and drop at the bottom right-hand side, and the
right, you're holding something at that point. You'll crash into your waste.
Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. You crash it there. There are other places you can use that is not one of them. Damn it.
Oh.
Okay. In that case, my original idea, which was on the top right-hand corner, the left arrow from the drop.
Yes.
If you bring that down one, and then you have the sensor on the corner, the hydrogen on the corner.
And an up arrow. Oops, wrong color.
Yep.
And
then the up arrow over the oxygen sensor. Not that one, the one 2 steps to the right. At the top up one tile.
Oh, here we
The
are.
up arrow, the up arrow there, if you bring that down one. That's 18 cycles slower, I think, but again,
Get rid
has
of this arrow.
yeah.
Okay, let's see if this
Let's
works.
see if this one works.
Looks like it works so far. And it does indeed, for a savings of one more symbol, 53 symbols instead of 56 symbols. But nice job, McCrush, anyways. For 23rd place with 56 symbols, or metric of 46, for a score of 4.153. Astronelson comes in at 22nd place, and here's their solution.
Yeah, so here we see a similar solution to the one RP0 made. So we can spot immediately the 3 counter on red on the third row, but we don't see a corresponding blue counter on anywhere, and we will soon see why. So here blue did a little bit of priming of everything. We will watch it run for a bit because there is a lot of priming to do. Come on, red, come on, blue, come on, blue. Here we go.
There we go.
So red comes in. It does this pretty standard way of turning everything into oxygen, and we will see this used in a lot of solutions where you fuse on the left and then you bring it all to the left to make everything into oxygen. When we have red that turns everything into CHH, much like RP0 turns everything into carbon helium, and then blue comes in and does the transformation into the monomer. The first one is very easy because we already have the pieces, so it just needs to put them down and bond them. So we can speed it up so we see the next monomer. Here we go.
Yeah, that bounce back from red with grab fuse and then grab again is the perfect way of making oxygen with a single pass.
Yeah, we note it now, and we will see in so many other solutions. We won't point it out all the time. So we have the same setup: carbon, hydrogen, hydrogen, and then this time the flip-flops on just after the sync triggers, and so we have nitrogen, and we make the second monomer.
So what happens with oxygen then? Because I don't see a second path to get to that fuse. Let's watch it fast to see what happens.
Yeah, so red state doesn't trigger the sync.
Do any amount of fusion. Interesting.
That's the 3 counter at work.
Since each monomer starts with oxygen anyway, there's no point in bringing it down and trying to do anything with it. You can just go straight to the output.
Nice.
That amount of bypassing saves quite a lot of logic jumping around red and blue in the splitters.
But it does require the extra sync, since the blue one is only doing 2 different paths. One for the carbon and one for the nitrogen.
Yeah, exactly. It's a trade-off. I mean, he needs much less work on the oxygen than RP0 solution, but he needs extra syncing because of the number of paths difference. He has an ideal placement of the hydrogen sensor on the top, and this is like how would you would like to output, because it uses the minimal amount of arrows, and we have seen it all. He uses just one sensor.
Only sensor uses for the output. They have the second sensor that goes unused.
Yeah, exactly. I wondered if it could be used to do some extra logic checking, like instead of all these flip-flops or instead of the things, but that would be some big amount of work.
Yeah, this solution is as submitted and it's good.
Yeah, well, let's go at 3 speed.
Yeah, because it builds it up on the...
I think if they put the sensor above the bonds on the bottom right, and you could use a carbon sensor in place of the 3-way flip-flop on the red side, I think that might be able to work. Because
there will always be a carbon above that bonder 3 when you're holding oxygen.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah, but that's a little bit of work. We're not going to do that here. And that would have saved a fair number of symbols, though. That would have saved a lot of symbols in here. But anyways, this gives Astronelson 53 symbols, or a metric of 45, for a score of 4.320. In 21st place, we've got darkid, who did this solution. Go ahead, Biggie.
Yeah, so darkid solution, in contrast to the previous very minimal sensor use, there's this whole box of sensors here to cause slightly different paths to happen depending on whether you're looking for the next sensor element or not. We also see this as a garbage ball solution, similar to the one we saw first from Bavarium, and more recently with the Rutherford stick. So far this solution hasn't found any atom that it agrees with. Let's maybe go a little faster so that we can get to the one that first passes the check. It's building it in the order viewed on the right, so it has oxygen that it's going to make first, and then nitrogen, then carbon. You'll also see that the bonding idiom, instead of just the simple bond and move down and drop, is this multi-stage thing where it pulls the previous partial product upwards, allowing it to sit on the sensor and properly inform what the next atom you're looking for is. That's how the sensor box on the left works. It's looking at the last thing that was bonded to it, which requires moving it all the way off of the bonders and letting it sit on the sensors to have all the logic work out.
Okay.
Yeah, so meanwhile, what's that garbage gadolinium, or no, that's germanium. What is the garbage germanium doing? Well, it created that from the first output, and once it finishes the second output, it's going to test whether it can fuse first garbage waste with second garbage waste, and because it can, that gets placed back up at the top. It's only when it can't that it starts to be added to the bottom in a waste stick. So it'll produce 0 or 1 atoms of garbage per output, and whether it's 1 just depends on whether it will allow it to fuse with the old one or not.
Okay.
Fusion succeeds again, so we get Rutherfordium. I should check to see how it actually determines that it should output, because I didn't look at any point.
It'll
Where's
drop
the
the
option?
Rutherfordium on the bottom grab drop, move the first one back up, and then it'll come down, and if the Rutherfordium is still there, which it is, when it comes back down, it'll grab it and bond it. Whereas if it could fuse, that wouldn't be there. It would have been fused to the what is now germanium.
Nice. That's really interesting. Okay. Let's watch it make
So yeah, blue only acts when red has finished 3 different additions, which allows it to be a simple flip-flop to determine whether to output or not. That makes sense.
yeah. But even either half molecule, it checks for the whether it can fuse the partial garbage in. And this time it's not going to be able to, so let's wait for, here we go. And blue's going to go here, I think.
So yeah, I think the hosts had 2 different types of solution in mind when they designed the puzzle. There's the no fusion version that'll just sort through things and try to bond the right stack of 6 together, and there's the fusion version that will convert everything into what it needs to be. I am not sure whether a build a waste stick solution was on their minds, but we're seeing some waste sticks because you can get away with 10 outputs before waste will clog up reactors, and it being competitive even in symbols is kind of interesting.
And let's run at 3 speed.
I mean, you can kind of assume that if we didn't want waste, we would have forbidden it.
Yeah, if you didn't want waste, you can just make the number of outputs required be 40 instead of 10 or something.
Yeah, I could just make a rule that says thing has to run forever. When it's not explicitly forbidden, we are like, yeah, it's interesting, so let them make waste.
And here's 9 outputs.
I imagine that they used this waste stick method. I assume that they originally did it, added 1 to the waste stick once per output, but with there being 10 outputs, that would mean potentially 10 atoms on the waste stick, and they presumably chose to do it this way to prevent it crashing as it builds the stick.
Oh, true,
Oh.
because the output gets all the way down to that tile, meaning that the width
Oh,
is
yeah,
about as wide as it can be.
Yeah, that's why the on the output the oxygen gets in the way of the waste stick, so there's actually a limit of 6 atoms on the waste stick, and that's why they use this method. Because if we get to the 6th one, you can see the oxygen coming down and would block it. The oxygen on the output blocks the waste stick, so they have to have a maximum of 6, and that's why they use the method where they wait until no more waste can be fused together. Interesting.
Here we go.
So, like, if there was
decisions
7, sorry.
And waits for that oxygen. Oh, there we go. Okay. That was interesting. Anyhow, darkid gets uses 53 symbols for a metric of 43 and gets a score of 4.586. Next solution is my own solution at 20th place. I'm going to describe it. So here we go. I'm going to make everything into an oxygen ball and then make HCH out of it. After I'm done making HCH, we're going to decide what kind of, here's a carbon being made. And here's my HC being made. It's got to rotate it because, well, had to rotate it. Here's blue making the HCH. I'm going to put it on the bottom. Now this one's a funny one because red's going to go down here and take the flip-flop path, which is too shorter than the other path. So when it comes back up here, we're handling the next input. It's going to hit this fuse just as blue hits this splitter. Excuse me. Yes, fuser. Excuse me. And this fuse does triple duty. And there's my nitrogen, hydrogen, and this sensor, which we'll see in a minute, decides whether the oxygen needs to go over. That's done by this sensor. And here we are. Here's my HCH making the nitrogen, and when the nitrogen goes there, the oxygen goes here, and it goes down, and red senses for the carbon up top and outputs. And so let's watch it go again at 2 speed. And there's the first half. Here comes the second half. And away we go. Output. Now, I was really proud of this one and terribly disappointed when I got 50th or 20th place. So let's see if my cohorts here can tell me why I got 20th place. Where's the extra symbols here?
Well, I think there's a lot of just path happening.
You mean in here and in here?
Like looking at the actual symbols that you use, you have a couple grabs, a couple fuses, and each of those could probably happen a smaller number of times. But the biggest thing is just the amount of arrows that it takes, especially on blue, to get everywhere you're trying to go is pretty symbol heavy.
Okay. Well, I can take that critique. Let's go at 3 speed to finish this up. And I had 51 symbols for a metric of 41 and a score of 4.870. Next solution is by Blueeyedrat. He got 19th place with this solution. Binky's going to discuss this one.
So this uses a similar method to yours, Rexkix, where it builds up the carbon monomer for regardless of what input it's got, and then constructs the relevant monomer afterwards. So here you can see it using those paths to build the carbon monomer, rotates it, grabs it, and then it passes over this fuse here. The interesting part about this solution is the way it uses the 3-way flip-flop on the right-hand side on the red path. So three-way flip-flops have two paths, and it takes one path twice and the other path once. But the important thing here is that it has different timing on the path it takes two times. So the first time it goes through, it takes 2 cycles longer than the second time it goes through. Sorry, other way around. And the important thing here is that when the carbon monomer precursor goes through, where it lies over the fuser on the top, it varies in relation to where the red goes over the fuses on the right-hand side. So with the oxygen there, you see that the red path goes straight up the first to the two fuses, and here, because it goes right and back, it was back on itself. It's now 2 cycles later, which means it only hits fuse on the second hydrogen passing over it. And then when the carbon comes round, it goes around the right path, and by the time the red reaches the fuse, the blue Waldo has already passed completely over the fuser, as you can see there. So it doesn't fuse it at all.
Okay, let's go watch it one more time.
And it's worth noting that because the two fuses are adjacent, it would not be possible to hold in the middle, because you would you can't hold HCH6 in the middle and fuse twice, because you would let go when the carbon was fused into the right side of the hydrogen. So you have to have this drop grab that blue has over the fuser to make sure that you're still holding the piece that's actually going to bond by the time you get to the bonder.
The drop grab also fixes the timing, because otherwise when you are 2 cycles late, it wouldn't work. So you need both things. You can't do that drop grab earlier, because then the timing doesn't work out.
Well, the thing that Biggie Mac is saying is that specifically for the oxygen output, the blue, if the blue was holding the carbon in the middle, the carbon is getting fused into the right-hand hydrogen. So you have to start by holding the right-hand hydrogen there. So when the oxygen's getting built on the next, in this one here, you can see that as the blue's going up, if it was holding the carbon here, as it passes over there,
it would let go, and the hydrogen would be lost to the void.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is a way of solving it. I had an approach that instead rotated things so that you would always be holding onto the middle atom, and you could just fuse in the hydrogen on the left and then on the left again. But yeah, this works well, and it allows the timing loop for the fuses to be a little tighter. This is 2256, which is a relatively fast solution for this submissions.
Okay. And let's go a little faster. And faster.
Blueeyedrat, I'd be curious to know if the sensor that is to the right of the bonders was ever used, or if that is just a fakey sensor.
I think it's a fakey, but maybe it was used at one point. And here we go. Blueeyedrat uses 51 symbols for a metric of 41 and a score of 4.950. Next solution is by CursedFlames at 18th place. IEEE is going to explain this one. Let's go.
Yeah, so it does sync, so you know I'm gonna like it. And what we see here is what the other guys here call a shopping solution. So we have blue looking for oxygen, and he will run around till he actually has found oxygen. He gets a sync on every. We see two syncs on red. One when he is done, and one when he's about to start. So this is a double sync process with red doing one loop, and then blue asking if the molecule, if the input is right, and if it is, that stops. Blue gets it and bonds it. Then the nice system of flip-flops sends blue into the right sensor each time. So we have nitrogen one, when we go back, and we get a carbon one, and then we go down and get the oxygen one, and we can split it up a bit because this now is wrong. So we have blue stuck into the nitrogen loop, and red red doing its loops. The last carbon.
Let's pay attention.
And yeah, because he has finished the flip flops, so the Waldo fold into the output. And here we go. We can see the garbage ball formation. So red has fused together over waste. So it's the usual Rutherfordium thing, where Rutherfordium is the biggest multiple of 8 we have, and he bonds it, and we have this waste chain drawing towards the left. Of course, CursedFlames has done the math so that we fit the waste chain just right before we 10 outputs. Yeah, we see this is everything, pretty much everything about this. What's the algorithm is pretty good because we will see it used in many other solutions. What makes this symbol heavy is all the syncing and back and forth needed. If we could turn this sensor block into all wall sensors with red doing its thing independently, we would gain a lot of symbols, and we'd see solutions that do exactly that later.
Okay.
We can speed it up, I think.
Yep. There you go. And this gives CursedFlames 48 symbols, or a metric of 38. He gets a score of 5.377. At 17th place, we have Csaboka, and he's my teammate in the tournament now. And Binky's going to explain this solution.
Yeah, so remember Astronelson's solution that had this bounce back on red with in fuse, head flip flop, grab fuse, flip flop down, and then detect whether or not you're going to be passing oxygen over. That is exactly what Csaboka is doing in their solution as well. The main differences come from how Csaboka chooses to build this HCH stick and optionally an NH stick, and you can see that there's a 2-count flip-flop down here in the bottom red to determine whether you pass over the fuser or not. Interestingly, they have the fuser right before the bonders because they had the spare fuser that they weren't using.
An interesting thing to note on this one is that on was it your solution, Rexkix? That no, I think it was somebody else's. On a previous solution, there was the 3-way flip flop on red, and I suggested you could have the carbon, the sensor over the carbon just above the bonders on the bottom right. This does pretty much the same thing. It just has it over the hydrogen instead on the left.
Yeah, an issue with carbon sensing is that you will trigger on the other sensor that is in the reactor whenever a carbon's over that, and that's often harder to avoid. Triggering on just hydrogen for the output sensing is is a bit more standard in my opinion.
Okay.
Definitely there are ways around it.
In this case, it wouldn't make any difference because there's always going to be a carbon next to that hydrogen on the left.
That is
so true. Even if the even whenever there's a carbon on the top sensor, there is going to be a hydrogen on the bottom sensor.
So I think both the sensing commands are pretty equivalent.
So
yeah,
you
they're
could put
equivalent
this
in this case.
sensor one to the right and change this to a carbon sensor right here.
Yeah, but it makes literally no difference to how it works.
Right.
I'm just saying that on a previous one I said it could be done with the carbon one.
Okay. There's one output. Let's go at 2-speed and see another output come out.
So the reason that Csaboka is able to put the fuser under the bonders is because their reassembly into carbon in the process of making HCH sticks happens on the original fuser. You can see that red makes that little spiky bounce back from below in the top left. It bounces back over the grab in 2 different directions. And it's kind of funny then to hit a command from all 4 directions.
Okay. Now let's go a little faster.
Yeah, Symbol's solutions run long enough that I feel like sometimes even 3-speed isn't enough, but then 4 just flies by immediately. So it's not a great intermediate.
Yeah. Well,
But exactly 2500 here.
Csaboka uses 47 symbols for a metric of 37 and a score of 5.585. At 16th place, we have Zig. with this solution, and Binky's going to discuss it.
So this one uses a similar method that's already been used, where it constructs a carbon, hydrogen, and then in the case of the nitrogen, fuses specifically for that one, and in the case of oxygen, skips that entire section entirely. First of all, it's a big jump in symbols over the previous one, going down to 39 symbols this time. And the interesting thing about this one is the fact that it uses a fuse hammer in the bottom left, which means that the red Waldo is left doing everything, but that also means that you don't need the three-way flip-flop on both sets of on both Waldos. And also, I forgot where I was going with that sentence now.
But yeah, the red has to do all the work here, but it does have a reasonably tight counting loop here to make sure that it's able to, like, you can see that the 3 count flip-flop here is in between the bonders and the fusion, and that just determines whether you're building all the way to HCH or NH.
Another thing to note is on the output in the top right, you can see that they've used the sensor, the nitrogen sensor, to detect whether it's an output, but they've also got the flip-flop below it. And it seems like it's redundant, but the sensors that they've already used a sensor in the bottom left-hand corner, with all that logic going on. And they're using the sensor on the right-hand side to detect whether they should skip the whole construction section on the left when they're sending in oxygen to the output. That means that the only way that they can tell when they've got a full output is using that flip-flop there, because they don't have anything to tell when the output has reached 6 symbols. So
Yeah, it simultaneously has to satisfy it has a nitrogen on the sensor and the stick is even length.
Right. Well said. And let's go watch it do another output without us talking. There's our carbon stick. Actually, let's go a little faster. And 3 speed.
It's impressive to see a fuse hammer made to work, because that's so much work for a single Waldo.
Yes.
And it's not going to be the last either.
As mentioned already, Zig gets 39 symbols instead of the previous 47 symbols for a jump of 8 symbols. Nicely done, Zig. And a metric of 29 for a score of 7.007. At 15th place, gggol, and IEEE is going to explain it. Here we go.
Yeah, so this is another of a solution class that looks for the things he likes, and if he doesn't like it, it fuses it in a garbage ball, makes rather fordium out of it, and then puts it on the bottom of the reactor. So we're going to see the last row having to be as free as possible, and so the molecule is built bottom up, leaving the last row always free. So we see blue has already found the first molecule he liked, and we have red here doing all the looping. And because blue hasn't taken the molecule away, red does a little bit of dance and stores the first garbage atom. We missed the first nice monomer, but we will see others. So we see here a 3 counter on blue. We just passed it. So now blue is stuck on the oxygen sensor. Blue doesn't like this nitrogen, so we'll see red fusing it all together and then putting it in the chain. Oh yeah, that happened.
Nice.
This is a nice.
So red's already making oxygen for the waste stick, so it may as well drop it off with the blue if the blue's already waiting for the oxygen.
Yeah, exactly. This is a little shortcut. I guess it can. I imagine it's an happy accident of a method, because it could just as well wait for the next oxygen. So we are now on a carbon sensor. So we wait for carbon.
Carbon's never going to get a shortcut.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, here we go. This the red chain is something that's used in Write All Along, for example, the main gain assignment. It is something that's used when you have to do both the left and the right side of a single atom. You have to do something like fusing or bonding, and it is very symbol efficient, but it is pretty slow with this double back and the need to go all the way. And we can speed up a little, so we see the output. So we have oxygen here, we have oxygen again.
Yeah, gggol is determining whether to output by every time you add an oxygen, they'll grab and shift it over if it's there.
Here we go. We can now see it's oxygen, and the output is done by the top line, and we see that this is grab sensing. So whenever there is an atom on the top left corner of the output zone, blue will grab it and bring it over there. This is needed. gggol can't just beat this thing on the output zone, because there is a 3 counter before it. So the output double back is run one per half molecule. Here we see it run. This is better. This is less symbols than making a 6 counter. I mean, or it is the last number of symbols, but it's faster for sure, because you build the molecule closer to the input line. Okay, we can watch the...
A grab command can be a discount sensor. It's going to work no matter what's there. It's just less convenient to use than a redirect sensor.
The grab command, you mean?
Yeah, the grab command is a discount sensor. If you don't have it in your reactor, you can still do something depending on whether an atom is in place or not.
Yeah, this is a class of puzzles are based on this. This is not one of such puzzles. We intend for you to have sensors to process this stuff. There is no need to do grab sensing. I mean, this puzzle would have worked without sensor at all. You do grab sensing on everything, but it would have just been a very, very different puzzle.
And here it is. It's grabbing, it's dropping, and output.
Community Edition is going to spoil everyone into using 5 sensors when they can.
Okay, well, let's go a little faster.
Yeah, let's watch this garbage chain grow. So this garbage chain is a little smaller than any other we'll see, because it can make every oxygen out of everything. So it will not be as long as the other solution we see that want a real oxygen for their oxygen atom.
Which is
convenient. And so
go ahead.
He can afford to start very, very on the right, because he has few atoms.
And let's wait till we get up to 9. And here's 9, and you can see our stick is only out to here.
Yeah, it is just five atoms. We will see similar solution need more, because they have to wait for real oxygen, so they waste more stuff.
And gggol comes in at 38 symbols for a metric of 28, and it scores 7.309. At 14th place, we have Noeuchar, whose name I wish I knew how to pronounce. Binky's going to explain this one.
So this one uses quite a few ideas that we've seen already. For the input, it uses a sensor grid to detect what's on the output and what the grabbing Waldo is holding, and which we've seen before. We've got the blue one, which is just there to fuse everything together into the waste atoms, and then when the red Waldo has the right atom, it'll take it over to the right, which we'll see hopefully in a second.
Here we go.
Yep, so oxygen first, takes it in, and it loops around this bit twice to ensure that it leaves the previous monomer over the sensor there, which sets up for the sensor grid on the left. And you can see here, drops it, drags the second one across, bonds them together, and then drags it back onto the sensor. The interesting thing about this one for me is the fact that the waste stick is started on the first half of the output. So if you see here, the red Waldo is going to go past, grab the waste atom here, take it to the waste stick. But every waste atom after this one is done for every 2 half outputs. As you can see on the flip-flop just above the carbon sensor where the blue Waldo is. The reason why the flip-flop's there in the first place is so that the red can go with the output without sending a half output out.
Okay, here's a desired monomer. Here we go. And here we're going to see an output. How's this done?
So as you can see, the carbon is over the sensor. It's going to pass over the carbon sensor in the left and skip over the flip-flop to go to the output, because this is the second time there's been a carbon over that sensor. And this time it drops the zirconium there for the blue to grab to leave it on the fuser, which just means there are fewer atoms on the waste stick.
Okay. Let's watch this.
Yeah, we got to run it towards most of the outputs to be able to see whether the waste stick is taking up all the space or not.
Oh, but we get a rainbow waste stick. Pretty.
Yeah, it makes it all the way to the farthest right edge of the reactor.
Hope it doesn't crash.
I do appreciate that these waste sticks have a lot of variety in them. The Rutherfordium ones are the most space efficient, but if you only have to make 10, you can get away with slightly more color. And in this way, the random seed really just determines the rainbow you get at the bottom.
Here we go.
Here we
Here's
go.
our carbon monomer. And an output. There we go. Noeuchar comes in at 14th place, also with 38 symbols, but he got better cycles than the previous solution, so he gets 14th place instead of 15th place. Nice job, Noeuchar. Next solution's by Lazy Comet at lucky number 13th place. Here we go. Biggie's going to talk about this one.
Yeah, so we can see a few features of the solution pretty quickly. Red is passing over a 6-count flip-flop array on the right. So this one's going to be counting to the number of stalks it's added to the output. We also see blue has a Rutherford sensor, so there's going to be likely some waste. So one pair of bonders is devoted to handling waste, one pair of bonders is devoted to building the output, and then the rest is just how do the Waldos manage to do all that selection. And in this case, we can see that it is a bounce back over each different type of sensor, one for nitrogen, one for oxygen, one for carbon. Carbon's approached from 2 different ways, just depending on whether it produced an output or not. And with no sinks, it's rather impressive that this is able to stay coordinated as well as it does, but I suppose because the sensors that break you out of the loop kind of act like a sink, because there's only a specific number of places that the blue Waldo can be when red finally breaks out of its bounce loop, that it's able to stay pretty well contained. One thing that was brought up is why would nitrogen have a length 2 bounce while oxygen has a length 3 and carbon a length 1? And the main reason for that is that the flip-flop that directs over into the oxygen bounce has to be to the right of the arrow that is on nitrogen, because if it was on that arrow, it would be toggled every single time you bounced. So oxygen has to be longer than nitrogen, and it gets away with not having a second arrow to keep it bouncing in a smaller container. Meanwhile, carbon gets to have an arrow on the sensor because there's no sensors that direct through carbon, while oxygen and nitrogen have to allow carbon to pass right through it if red just bounced off of the carbon sensor. So yeah, everything that this solution is doing, we've seen before, but this one's doing it more efficiently than any we've seen before it. So it brings it to 37.
And let's watch it a little bit without us talking. And there's our count for the output. Oh, missed it. That's okay. Here we go.
And it reaches the right edge of the reactor with its Rutherford stick, but it never actually crashes. Not in 10 outputs, at least. I do kind of like the aesthetic of putting the two unused splitters in the places that there's no Waldo path and no input zone, so that when you're holding 3, you get to see the streaks of the Waldos leave the imprint where the splitters sit in negative space. It's cool.
And here's the oxygen. There's our Rutherford stick. And we're outputting. Nicely done. Okay, Lazy Comet. You got 37th place. Excuse me, you didn't get 37th place. You had 37 symbols for a metric of 27 for 13th place. That's better. And a score of 7.707. Nicely done. JoJo got 12th place with this solution, and Binky's going to explain it.
So on this one, we see something that I don't think we've seen in a previous solution, which is bringing in a bunch of inputs and then checking to see if the correct input, or cycling through those inputs to find the correct input to add onto the stick on the right-hand side. I quite enjoy JoJo's method of handling this stick. As you can see, it'll be spinning quite a bit. So it grabs it and then rotates it around, drops the other end of the stick for the red to grab, and that'll take it over. And then the blue will rotate it again, leave the other end of the stick for the, and then rotates the middle section. So effectively, it is cycling through every single one on the stick in a honestly kind of weird way of doing it, but I just enjoy watching how it spins around like that. And the red Waldo, as you can see on the bottom left, uses the wall sensors, which saves using sinks and saves using the arrows for back and forth over the sensor. So the red's waiting for the stick as it rotates on the blue to hover over the sensor where you're looking there. And if it's the correct one, the red one will be sent around to grab the
Now, why does
input.
he sense for carbon both here and here?
One of them's on the output path and the other isn't.
Oh, I see. Here's the
There's a
output.
flip-flop deciding whether to output or not, but they both need to funnel into a carbon sensor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And here's waiting for the oxygen to come, which is going to happen this next time.
Nope.
Oh, am I wrong? Okay.
It looks like he's going to, and that's why I like this one.
Here
This one here.
It's hard to predict the order just because your brain doesn't think in the way that this is being permuted. It's really cool.
I'll agree with that. Nice job, JoJo. This is really fun to watch. Now, is this JoJo's first tournament? I think so.
I think it is. I mean, he has already submitted all the other puzzles, but I think it is his first year. Let me check a moment.
Okay. And this is a slow solution, to be sure, but it's fun to watch. And there's an output, and here he's going on the output, waiting for carbon right there. He gets it.
I think the number of times, I guess the winding number of every atom in the output in JoJo's solution is the highest among anyone.
You're not wrong.
Yeah,
Later on,
he
later on,
didn't
we'll see it.
participate in 19 and in 18, so I think he's new.
Okay. Well, nice job, JoJo, getting 12th place in your first tournament. That is awesome. And let's go watch it at a little faster speed.
So what you will notice here, though, is that it requires there not being a run of bad inputs because the stick is always only length 5. And
Now,
if the randomness decides that 5 inputs in a row are all not the one that you want, you could run forever here. This works just because in the first 60 inputs, the bad array doesn't happen.
and here it's going to end this time. There's the oxygen coming through. And
Yeah, we'll see another solution later that uses a different way of keeping that buffer of inputs, and that also still requires a stack of at least 5.
Yeah, so to not cheat at all, you will need to keep 9 because you may have four of one kind, 4 of your kind, and
right.
because the bag is long 12, and of course keeping 9 inputs would make it impossible to do a lot of stuff. So it's good that we don't need so many outputs that we see a lot of bad sequences, or many of these solutions would be impossible.
Now, JoJo also got 37 symbols, but his cycle count was less than the previous two, and so he get 12th place. Well done, JoJo. Next one is by Biggie Mac, and Biggie Mac is going to talk about this one.
Yep,
Let's go,
that's
Biggie.
me. Yeah, so I brought this down over the course of the week of solving from 57 all the way to 36. I'd hoped 36 was a better number than it is, but it's 11th place, so it is what it is. The approach here is blue will take everything and over the course of a few spins through this long loop, turn it into oxygen, and then when it's not the first case where red will just take the oxygen directly into the output, blue will then also build a CH2 stick. So we'll watch blue build CH2 here. There's a lot of path reuse, which makes it very slow. This is this is over 6,000 cycles, so it's one of the slower ones. But when it finally is of the full length, which red senses by detecting when it has the second hydrogen, the first hydrogen gets bypassed because red's waiting on carbon, but the second hydrogen is when red starts to join the action as well. Red grabs the HCH, bonds it onto the other thing, but depending on whether it made the long loop or the short loop, it'll either fuse in the hydrogen to make NH, or it'll not fuse and keep HCH. Oxygen is handled separately, so I don't need a 6 counter on the timing. I only need a 6 counter on the output. So here we see HCH get fused.
Okay, there's the fuse.
Yep, it's the same fuse that was already being used to build oxygen.
Oh, nice.
So I felt like I was good for getting that reuse of a symbol.
Indeed.
But yeah, so red went all the way to the bottom row in this one, which allowed it to be slow enough that the fuse didn't fuse HCH into NH. But if it hits the flip-flop, then it'll make NH instead.
Oh, there's the output.
And yeah, the oxygen sensor is so that red just doesn't have to do any amount of fusion for oxygen outputs. Earlier iterations did a rotate over the fuser so that it could fuse in the H's on both sides, but it turned out to be a slightly better symbol efficient savings to grab oxygen directly after it is placed on the splitter.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else want to say something, or do we watch this just go? I think we watch this just go. Nice job, Biggie.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this one will run forever, unlike waste balls or pulling for the right sequence. So I felt good about that too.
I like how you've lined up the carbon and hydrogen sensors to save any arrows to get them both going the same path on the blue Waldo in the top middle.
Oh.
Yeah, it's convenient, but it uses both of the sensors, which was the downside of it, because now I don't have another sensor to use.
That's true. So you have to use the 6-way flip-flop to
Oh, that's why you have to
get
wait
to the
for
output.
the next oxygen.
Yeah, because I mean, red's already back into the loop as soon as it gets that oxygen sense, so it'll make the output, but it has to timing its way to grab the oxygen that blue just dropped.
Okay, let's go watch this a little faster.
It's worthy of quite a lot faster, taking over 6,000 cycles.
Okay, you say a
This
little
one's at 3
faster.
or 4 speed.
Okay, we'll watch it 3. 4 is just blindingly fast. You know, we can see 4 when.
Blinding speed is a feature.
Okay,
It's
you're
definitely a
right.
feature when you build these large monsters.
Yes, well, this does run at 62, 64 cycles, but more importantly, it has 36 symbols, giving Biggie Mac 11th place and a metric of 26 or a score of 8.123. Yes, 123.
Points.
In 10th place, we're in the top 10, is Gigs. And IEEE is going to explain this one.
Yeah, so this is another fuse hammer solution. So this time red fuses. So we see blue doing all the real work. We have a bunch of anything here. And here we finally start. So this is a similar way to handle random inputs because he comes from the left. Instead of a double back, he can just grab, and blue fuses everything for him. And we missed the initial part, but we can see that we have split the initial input that is oxygen because we have already fused it into carbon and 2 hydrogens. And so we're going to make CHH sticks. We are always going to make CHH sticks when we come down here. So this doesn't change with any sensor or any complex logic. So we come down another time and we go out with another CHH. As we can see, we have this line of fuser sensor splitter is common we have already seen it in other solutions because it's a neat way of doing beryllium, then an helium, and then making a carbon and escaping once you have an hydrogen at end. And we now have exhausted our 3 counter on the top. We are holding an oxygen, and we bond it out. So now you may be wondering how we do nitrogen, and the answer may surprise you. My God.
Oh.
IEEE with the clickbait words.
Yeah, I mean, someone has to say that.
Yeah, no, it's surprising. Here we go, we're going to get our oxygen.
Slow down, because magic happens here. So up until now, this flip-flop on the top has just went to the left and nothing else. But now that we have something to grab, we trigger the sensor, and we have these two fusers placed such in a way that other than doing their normal job, they are also correctly fusing the two hydrogens into the correct carbons to make the hydrogens. So now that you've done this, the blue Waldo continues all on the right and outputs.
Okay, let's watch that again because I missed
I think that's a beautiful solution to output sensing and even determining NH versus HCH.
Yeah. This is. There are many parts of this solution that are really neat. Where it suffers a bit are the very complex handling to do the CHH on the bottom left.
And let's watch the nitrogen
also
being
interesting
made.
It's also interesting that both of the hydrogen sensors use the same sensor despite having completely different reasons to be sensing for a hydrogen.
Yeah.
I assume that would just be a happy accident, but it means that the other sensor isn't needed at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of flip-flops on the bottom left, but they are all one use only. So I imagine that by using a sensor, it could cut nothing from.
Okay, let's watch this a little faster.
Yeah, I mean, this is most of the solutions are around the 2000 cycles mark, 2005, 2006, and something like that. This is a bit lower at 4000, but not so bad. We will see.
Beats mine. It beats mine on the tiebreaker where I was at 6,000 at the same symbol count. So good job, Gigs.
Yeah.
In 10th place, gggol uses 36 symbols, metric of 26 for 8.203. In 9th place is anningmay, this is his first tournament. Nice job, anningmay, for 9th place. Binky's going to explain this one. Here we go.
Yeah, so what we see really quick is that blue has a very tight loop. It's just bouncing around in 10 cycles. Or no, that's only 8 cycles.
Yes.
And we'll get to see what it's doing with those 8 cycles once we have an input coming over from red. Red like stalls on that splitter, and blue just splits pieces off and fuses them over. The first one gets dropped, the second one gets grabbed, and that is a carbon, which frees red in like a pseudo sync. And it very conveniently allows the HCH stick to be built without too many extra symbols. This is a very lightweight way of building HCH. And then the one fuse command in blue's loop determines whether HCH becomes NH or not. And that's just based on the timing red has with its counter, I think. Oh no, it's also based on the positioning. Because red doesn't even pass over the fuser. So yeah. If we look at what red's doing with its flip-flops in the top right, we probably have to run fast enough to see it go through each state. So here, red actually passes over the fuser by diverting with the flip-flop to the left. Meanwhile, this third one, it passes through the 3 counter entirely and doesn't bother with HCH at all, just giving output oxygen directly. But yeah, on this one, you see it passes through the flip-flop. There's never a chance to fuse. On the next one, it passes over to the left, fusing once. And on oxygen, it bypasses any of the fusion fission. It's very slick, and it does look pretty symbol efficient at this point.
And
Which
blue
makes
hits
us
the
curious
fuse
how
at the right time. Nice.
Yeah.
Which explains why this is a delay wall a wall flip flop to delay
a
one
Waldo.
second. I call these guava pauses.
I don't.
There was a tournament where Guava Moment explained them.
I see.
But anyhow,
Lava Moment was before my time, unfortunately.
yeah.
Yeah, and they have a spare sensor from all of this that allows them to output just based on carbon reaching the bottom.
And a spare splitter.
Yeah, although using 2 splitters in this is pretty rare. I don't think there's a very easy way to utilize the second one.
Fair enough.
I guess if you're trying to just split multiple times while you're holding, because I've seen some of the earlier solutions we looked at did split.
It's mostly for symmetry. I mean, we give 2 fusers and then splitters. It seems just bad to give 2 of and then 1.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're not using something, you can just put it in the reactor and not care.
Yeah, exactly. You have tools. You don't have to use them.
Okay, let's watch this go a little faster.
So also at 36 symbols, but beating gigs and me because this is actually fast. Well, still 3,800, but much faster than what we looked at before.
And here we go. And 36 symbols is promised a little faster. Anningmay gets 9th place with a score of 8.283. Nicely done, Anningmay. Next solution is Counterpoints at 8th place. And Binky's going to explain this one.
So this one is a particularly slow one at more than 9,000 cycles, but it is very symbol efficient, and it does so by going around this loop here a lot more times than it kind of needs to, but it saves symbols in doing so, and this is all to build up a carbon hydrogen stick. And in previous solutions that have a similar method, it'll construct the nitrogen or oxygen at this point in the stage, but in this case it doesn't do that. Instead, it'll build another carbon hydrogen stick, and we have seen this once before. What we haven't seen is a third one going around again to build a third carbon hydrogen stick.
Third one. Here we go.
Yeah.
And let's make a
We
fourth
continue
one.
going.
fifth one.
And once we build the sixth one, that is when the magic happens.
And here, let's watch.
So
the
in a
sixth.
previous solution, we've seen the output being dragged onto the fuses on the left-hand side to create the nitrogens. But in that case, the oxygens were already made. Here, it needs to make the oxygen as well. And the way it does that is it'll go up, grab it at the top, do a similar thing where it drags it over.
Doesn't count. It grabs at the very top.
Yep. And because the blue Waldo is hammering onto the fuse, that means that the red can just do all these instructions here without bothering dropping or grabbing to specifically input a fuse. And now it can rotate the entire stick around and perfectly lines it up so that the oxygens now line up on the fuses, creating the output in one go.
And let's watch that again. Now, why doesn't this output every time?
It only is on that path when the carbon sensor activated.
Oh, okay, you're right.
Which is only the case when it grabbed. There's this whole loop around the outside which is devoted to the finishing touch, and it's impressive that it's 35 symbols with that whole loop existing.
Okay, let's watch this one. We'll catch the next one.
$9,500 cycles and only like 30 interesting ones.
Yes.
I mean, come on. The left loop is pretty impressive. I mean,
it's just extremely efficient and it does the right thing.
It's just a bit boring to watch because you have on the bottom right corner a corner that's touched like 15 times. So it is low because it has to grab drop each time.
And here we go. Fuse, rotate, grab, and there's the oxygens.
Yeah, you have to grab it from the side because otherwise you can't rotate it on the right parity. Because you need
and it needs to rotate on the bottom row because if it stayed hold in the middle and rotated it earlier, it would have one of the other monomers over the fuses and not the oxygen one, so it would wind up with the wrong output. So it has to grab, drop, and rotate on the bottom row to be able to get the oxygen specifically onto the fuses.
Let's watch this yet one more time because this one's fascinating. Thank you, Counterpoint, for a great solution.
Yeah, you are a bit constrained on where you put the oxygen. It would be easier if you could put it on one mock, but you can't. It's the only place where they can't go.
Nice. Okay, that's 4. Let's watch it go. Oh
yeah,
God, this is
take a while.
Painfully slow. There we go. 35 symbols, our first 35 symbol solution. 9,526 cycles. Gives Counterpoint 8th place and a score of 8.640. Thank you, Counterpoint. That was great to watch. Next solution is by Sir at 7th place, and IEEE is going to explain it. Here we go.
Yeah, so this is maybe the first solution to filter a true timing loop. Because we see the blue, we will see clearly in a bit. Other than moving around this fuse split sensor loop, much like many other solutions we've seen, has also used its fuse to do the random input handling on the top left. We see here the first use of a blue loop, where it does the same thing we've seen in many other solutions, that split fuses until he escapes on a nitrogen sensor. Red 2 waits for a nitrogen, so he has a nitrogen to grab, bond, and do the second monomer. We go up and we can see blue acting with a fuse double back, fusing everything together. The 3 counter of red says that now is the turn of CHH, and here is the most complex handling of this part, because red is going, but he hits the hydrogen sensor, and he does this just to waste some time, so that he has an hydrogen here and another one that's coming, and he can bond everything in one go. That hydrogen sensor could be a flip-flop, but it is faster this way because you don't need to do that when you do nitrogen, so you don't need to waste time. And the syncing is pretty impressive, and it is maintained by the two wall flip-flop on the bottom left corner, on the top right, and then the top left corner, and just that. So it is pretty impressive that he can handle all this timing with just that. And here we're nearly done because we see the last nitrogen monomer. We just need one extra monomer to make a complete molecule. And you can see it is much faster than counterpoints, despite being the same symbols. Here we get the carbon. Here we go. So now that we push the last monomer through, you see the top sensor, it activates. Here we go. So we go to the left here and output. Done. Coming back takes a bit, but we are back and we can keep going. And still, of course the oxygen sensor positioning is done so that the timing is kept. I can imagine that building this wasn't the easiest thing. Building timing loop this complicated is usually very complex on first approach, because when you build it from scratch, nothing works, and you have to painstakingly time everything. I'm a big fan of timing loops. I use them often, and I know Sir does it often too. So we have seen this running in detail. I think we can speed it up.
And let's watch it a little faster. And one more time through, and then we'll go 3 speed. And this also runs at 35 symbols, but it's faster than the previous solution, giving Sir 7th place. Next solution is by ToughTought. He got 6th place, and Biggie's going to explain this one.
Yeah, so in ToughThought's solution, we see a couple features. We see all the splitters and fusers set up along the top with nothing going over them. And we see that Blue has a grab-drop loop that is 9 grab drops long. So we saw earlier that JoJo had a shuffling technique where 5 different inputs were stacked together and you would rotate to get them around. The other way of shuffling 5 inputs, and I think the more common way amongst the remaining solutions, is this series of 2n-1 grab drops. You can take 5 inputs and prevent them from ever crashing into each other while you shuffle them in a large circle with 9 grab drops. We probably want to run this fast enough because the beginning of the solution is red bouncing around an initialization loop to make sure that there are 5 inputs thrown into this. The 5th input is the first oxygen, which is how red knows to break out and get into the main loop. And so now we rely on the same lucky feature of randomness that JoJo relied on, where at some point in this cycle of 5, the elements on the sensor will be the correct one for this build. And if you grab it for HCH first, and then HN second, and then O third, and you keep pulling in that order and adding the new input after you've grabbed the last one, you will always have in this cycle of 5 at least one of the thing that you're looking for. And that's just a lucky accident. IEEE had mentioned you would need 9 to be able to guarantee this in the long term. But with 5, you can pass this puzzle with 5. It's actually possible to pass it with 4, but you would have to pull in the much more inconvenient order NOC, NOC, which does not mean that you're building the output correctly. Okay. So the fact that ToughTought is able to get down to 33 symbols with this approach when 9 of them are taken up by blue grab drops is extremely impressive. And this is considered another cliff in terms of the symbol count, dropping from 35 to 33 in one place.
One thing I really like about this solution is that the setup, all it involves is 2 hydrogen sensors and an oxygen sensor, and obviously the alpha input, and that is literally it.
Yeah, in all of my attempts, I had to have a loop that red would follow that was equal to 2 different loops of the blue one, because it takes blue 2 circles around this entire path to actually move things by enough to be safe to grab another input. And ToughTought gets around that by having the first pass covered by one hydrogen sensor and the next pass covered by a second hydrogen sensor. It's so easy.
Could you call this initialization precog because you have to know that you're getting an oxygen at the 5th one?
Yes, this is definitionally precog because it relies on the 5th input being oxygen, but it is also
and it also relies on the first 4 ones not being oxygen.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. But it's randomness abuse beyond precog in the fact that 5 inputs shuffling will always work and not ever stall you out on a point where you might have like OONNO and you're looking for HCH.
Nice. But let's run this a little faster since it's a little slow. Not too slow.
Yeah. For what it matters, I thought this style of solution. I would have bet on this class of solution taking that spot and not the other class that's a split fusion method. Back when I first approached the puzzle after RP0 brought it out, and I was pretty wrong.
Yeah, the first thing that I did when I got this puzzle was write out the first 60 plus inputs in a string and see what patterns I could find using some code to scrape it. And I built a solution like this, and it was pretty bad. I got it to be better, but it remained pretty bad. And the one that was fusing and fissioning was much, much better for symbols for me. I had thought that, yeah, fuseless, fissionless was just going to be a novelty solution and not actually worth any points on the leaderboards. And people proved me wrong. ToughTought getting a legitimate 6th place with it.
Nice. I think
So
this
I
is
truly had high expectations. I had a low assessment of it, and it was in the middle.
I mean, I didn't exactly understand well how this would end up. I just thought it would be too inconvenient to fuse everything. But I have a mindset of having one fuser. So every time I see these puzzles, my mind thinks about how hard it is to do things with one fuser. But here you have 2, and I actually have less experience than all of you in using multiple fusers. So my idea of difficulty is a bit skewed.
Something else to note about this one is that the blue loop could theoretically be 2 cycles shorter because there are 5 grabs on the left and 4 grabs on the right. But the gap on the left is needed to have the hydrogen pass over the sensor in the startup. For the red Waldo startup to count the number of hydrogens passing over it. Otherwise, if there was a grab drop there would be hydrogen sat on it, so the red one would just continuously bounce back and forth.
Oh.
Yeah, that's true. The fact that it's only over hydrogen for 1 cycle allows those initialization steps to work out.
Yeah, otherwise, it would just be repeatedly sending it in alpha, and it would just immediately crash.
I'm curious if there's a reason that the blue loop isn't also one just space narrower, because you don't have to take it all the way to the far right where you are.
I have
you
the answer to that one.
And
because
what is your answer?
the nitrogen sensor here can just barely make it before blue's grabs and cycles around. Blue has to be a little slower.
That makes total sense.
Let's watch the carbon go through, and we'll watch the nitrogen go through. And here comes the nitrogen. And maybe it's not so close.
Yeah, well, no, because if the blue one was shorter, the blue wall would grab the hydrogens attached to the nitrogen.
Yeah, it would
go apart.
Pull an atom in 2 directions at once.
Yeah. Which
is
isn't
one of the ways
allowed
that SpaceChem delivers you a beautiful sound.
And that gives ToughTought 33 symbols for a nice jump over the 35 symbol preceding it. And it gives them a score of 9.426. Neat solution, ToughTought. In 5th place is brookieoz, and Binky's going to explain his solution.
So this one's, again, a similar set of ideas to what we've seen before, where they'll keep looking for the specific things to send over to the output. We've also seen before the fact that if blue is waiting for an oxygen, red will construct an oxygen on the next input, regardless of what the input is, which will save it continuously cycling through to find the next oxygen. It also uses the wall sensors, which saves arrows or sinks, which is a lot of simple saves. Something else to note is that at the bottom left, you've got the 2 oxygen sensors. And the reason for that is for the output in the bottom right, because there's, for every 2 oxygens being sent over, there's going to be 1 output. And having the 2 oxygen sensors on the left means that you don't have to have 2 arrows to reconnect those 2 lines. You can just have the 2 oxygens performing the same task, saving symbols.
Now, what's the purpose of this wall flip-flop? Why do we need to be slower there? Is it so
I don't
we
have
can?
an answer.
Okay. Is it so we can make it from this oxygen? I wonder. Let's just see.
Yeah, it's the time between the in alpha and the red reaching the grab drop on the top right.
Oh.
Yes, I can imagine that grab would be bad if it was
Oh. You're right. If it was a carbon hydrogen monomer.
But if that was
CH2.
the case, then blue would have come in from higher up, and so it wouldn't be as tight of a timing. Like just there, blue is 2 squares higher when it actually started moving, so there wasn't as much of a rush.
Well, no, because I think the red would have grabbed the hydrogen on it.
Well, let's go see in a minute. First, let's run this. This is a little slow.
Here we get.
This one, same as gggol's, prevents the waste from building up as quickly with the oxygen getting diverted on a drop. That vertical stick on red is basically the same idea as gggol's, with the wall sensors save another, what was it, 6 symbols over what gggol put together?
Yes. And let's go. Let's let it run a little bit longer at this speed. And this output. And let's go see something in a minute. Brookieoz gets 5th place with 33 symbols and a score of 9.506. But I really want to see this.
Yeah, and the true experimentation. What happens if we just do what we think should work and watch it fail? It seems like
Uh-oh.
it's the nitrogen that fails.
Yeah.
That's odd.
Huh. Yeah, because that's
it
the
might
highest
not be
one.
getting to those wall sensors on the very first. It might be not waiting on the wall sensors.
Cycle 942. Let's.
There might be a point where the input has already been dropped in and blue is late to the wall sensor.
Right, yeah. Could be.
And here we go.
Yeah, blue is late to the wall sensor.
Yeah.
So that's a total
makes
lucky
sense.
accident that you're never so late that the flip-flop can't fix your problems. Very cool.
Okay.
Glad we experimented.
Yeah. Oops, wrong one. Here we are. That's the right screen. And like I said, Brookieoz got 33 symbols for 5th place and a score of 9.506. In 4th place, we have rezoons with this solution, and IEEE is going to explain it.
Yeah, so here we can see an amalgamation of ideas. We see the double back over the input to make everything into oxygen. It is particularly simple because this is another swap fuse hammer solution. Sorry, and so you just need to add an extra arrow to have everything turned into oxygen. So we first see here the first non-trivial molecule because the oxygen was handled easily. We'll see it later. We see at this point I lost it. We'll just watch it run and analyze it from the next one. We see we are doing an NH here. Here we go. And we bond it from the bottom. We have a lot of space, so it's not an issue starting from here. So now we can watch building on a long monomer. we have a usual splitter sensor fuser that breaks out on hydrogen and bonds it to the carbon. Then here, this sensor this flip-flop activates. It wasn't active before, but it is now. And so that we have our HCH that we bond up. If we had to do a nitrogen monomer, we take the other path. We see here oxygen. It skips the 3 counter and puts it straight to the bottom. A similar thing will happen with an extra oxygen, where we will just drop it and output. So we see the construction of a nitrogen monomer. The flip-flop isn't active, so we go all around, and now we have a nitrogen that we put into the right spot, so that we bond it to the hydrogen and do the same thing we do with the other one. Let's watch the last one, because, well, this isn't really different, because the outputting doesn't happen here, but here. So it is more convenient to output when you're dropping the first monomer of your new molecule, instead of the last monomer of the molecule, because the first monomer is oxygen, so it already follows a very different path, and it's easy to slip and out inside the branch.
Yeah,
And
oxygen has only 2 times it'll have to be counted instead of the 4 that is counted for the rest.
yeah, exactly.
And it's also the path that oxygen takes has 2 parallel lines that it can go between. Whereas if it was doing it at the end, you'd have to sort of have 2 arrows to reconnect to the line. Whereas just there where it's going now, it just goes straight from one line to another, so you only need the 1 arrow.
Yeah, the whole thing is pretty convenient. I also wanted to say that the second sensor here, the one under the grab, is actually unused. I mean, I imagine it was used in a previous iteration and he just left it here. It really looks like it's used by something, but it isn't. I don't see a place where he could save a flip-flop. So really,
I mean, it does line up with the carbon hydrogen just here, but the hydrogen is already being passed underneath the sensor on the left, so there's
Hydrogen is strongly sensed. It's in both sensors.
Exactly.
yeah. If you want, but you have already decided to go there from the hydrogen sensor.
We just need to be sure that there's a hydrogen somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine you've already talked about it in previous videos, but the sensors are a logic OR. So you just need a nitrogen over any of them, and hydrogen is sensed. Having both being hydrogen changes nothing.
I can personally say I'm glad you gave us 2 sensors, because that was needed in my solution.
Yeah, I mean, I find that having multiple sensors is a big step up from the original game. Not much in possibility. You can do pretty much everything with more flip-flop or stuff like that. But you can do fancier things with 2 sensors. Like you can have two places where you make complex choices, and that makes solution more interesting, in my opinion. The same way that giving an extra 8 bonders wouldn't make.
Okay.
I was going to say also, it's worth noting that rezoons was the winner of the symbol optimization for unpacking, the 2018 puzzle that was very similar to this.
Yeah, it was, but yeah, that at high level, when you talk about high level, they are pretty similar puzzles. But when you actually talk about the specifics, they show several differences. I mean, you don't have chain handling here. You can make waste while in the other one you just had CHH. So you could take inspiration, but clearly it doesn't translate 1-to-1.
Yeah, even just the grab, split, fuse, drop idiom used here is very different in its shape and type than it was in the unpacking solve that rezoons put.
Now, rezoons won the symbols competition in week 2 of this year's tournament.
Yeah,
also true.
Yeah, he is good at symbols.
And here we go. 33 symbols for rezoons in 4th place.
Faster than ToughTought, yeah.
A little faster than ToughTought is right. and 9.586 points. Now we're at the podium. DariusOne gets third place, and Binky's going to explain this one.
So for this one, we only accept carbon, hydrogen, and hydrogen. Everything else is put into waste, and usually there isn't really much space to store that much waste. But you'll see in a bit how well both Waldos worked was making the sticks of waste. So here we have the blue Waldo just cycling around trying to find another hydrogen.
It's notable that it's sensed not via the carbon, but by the fact that it has the hydrogen on the rightmost point, being the only input to do that.
Yeah.
Here's the fuse.
Yep.
And here's the other fuse.
Mm-hmm. So the timing on that will be based on the carbon sensor on the top of the red. So if it does, yeah. So if there's a carbon on the right-hand side on the output, the red will take it up to that fuser. Whereas if there isn't one there, it'll just ignore that fuser for the nitrogen and carbon, I assume, for both of them.
It's also dependent on the mod 3 positioning of the hydrogen wall sensor, because it'll avoid fusing altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, so as it's coming down there, it's at the bottom right-hand side, whereas the other cases, it's one. As it's coming down here, it'll head over to the hydrogen on the wall, which is slightly desynced from the other hydrogen in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah, I think it was Zig who had said something in their solution title about, is one of these going to be mod 3 timing based? And this one is. Just based on the position of the hydrogen wall sensor, it's going to mod 3 timing its way out of fusing in the HCH.
And now we've started making the Rutherfordium stick here. And if you see here, there's only space for 5 Rutherfordiums in the stick. And when it gets to that point, when the red Waldo comes around the bottom, it will grab the bottom of the stick and deposit it in the bottom left, allowing for a total of 10 Rutherfordium atoms to fit in. Whereas if there was just one stick, it wouldn't be able to fit that many in.
And let's watch this run a little faster since it is slow.
Yeah, I think everything interesting left is the end.
Yeah, by having the sticks on the left, it means that they can have the output further down to go right down to the bottom to allow space for doesn't need to allow space for the waste stick to go underneath it, which has been the case in a lot of previous solutions.
And let's watch that Rutherfordium stick go.
Yep.
It's also very active waste, as blue is carrying each atom all the way through its bounce down, up, and around.
Yep.
Yes.
So it should be about now. Yeah, so the Rutherfordium stick's gone down, and now when the red starts moving, it'll grab the Rutherfordium stick. There we go. Drops it over there, and now the blue can start making another Rutherfordium stick for the final 5 outputs.
I wonder how far he gets with that second Rutherfordium stick.
I think it'll make it down to the bottom. Oh no, it'd be probably one up from it.
It really just depends how much mass is added before you get your 60th HCH.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, one up from the bottom.
And 31 symbols for DariusOne. Better than the 33 that preceded it for third place. And
I like how it has 5,555 cycles.
It's almost like
New
you
York
planned
area
it.
code.
In second place, we have Darius H, who needs to tell me if it should be Dariush. But IEEE is going to explain this one. Let's go.
Yeah, this one is pretty complicated. We have a blue that's doing a similar thing to the one Ser was doing. So it has both the split fusing task and using its fuses to do some magic elsewhere. And we can see he has split the input, and so he is holding an hydrogen. Red was waiting on that, so now he moves around this hydrogen and he drops it in place. Then he goes up, and we will see later why it goes up to do absolutely nothing. It will come back down, input the next, and then move the carbon up and line it with the hydrogen. When we get the next one, we do the usual oxygen reduction with a grab and the double back. This is all done with a timing loop with blue fuse. Man, English is hard. Which was, I imagine, pretty bad to sync up. Now this is nitrogen time, so red doesn't trigger the flip-flop, goes down, makes a nitrogen and bonds it. It has inputted another input, so now he has an oxygen, which goes straight down, and it is bonded, and we have half our molecule. We will make the other half and then output it with a carbon sensor on top. What is more interesting here is that we see nowhere the usual tree counter. So how does this solution keep track of which monomer it needs to make? Well, it turns out the counting is done by the left side flip-flop, the one on this one, and the bottom one. So these two flip-flop form a 4 counter, and in this 4 counter, one of the branches, that is the one that we took earlier, so we missed it. But in any case, the one that we take when we are holding the carbon hydrogen doesn't input a new input. All the other branches get a new input. So what actually this is a 4 counter with an empty iteration that just brings an hydrogen out, and this forms a 3 counter, all integrated in the construction loop. So unlike many other solutions that need a 3 count flip-flop to decide which monomer are they building, and then many flip-flops to run around the construction loop, this has everything integrated into a pair of flip-flops. Here we see the oxygen one. We see an output. So we trigger the carbon sensor and come down. This is all correctly timed with a blue loop, because as we are about to see, blue has to fuse at the right moment. Here, we get it. So let's just notice the carbon loop. So we see here the flip-flop is activated. So here that we are holding the carbon hydrogen, we do not get to input, and we'll make an empty loop so that everything will sync up. Here we see, and we go up and miss the input. Not only the timing, but even fitting everything together is pretty impressive here. This is an empty loop.
This solution is even working with bonder priority. It's pulling out all of the stops of complexity.
We have bonder priority.
It's in when it's bonding the second HCH.
Oh yeah, right.
It would not bond to the oxygen first.
Yeah. We don't see it here, but we will see it on the next half molecule here, because we put an hydrogen right next to the oxygen. Yeah, this is a very mild use of bonder priority, but yeah, this is probably the only solution using bonder priority. I think.
Wow.
So when the carbon goes into position, you would want it to prevent the hydrogen bonding to the oxygen by bonding first.
Yeah, it's about to
happen. That's really impressive right here.
Yeah, exactly. The oxygen prefers the carbon and not the other.
Nice.
Yeah,
this solution is thoroughly amazing, and it runs forever too, which we can't say of maybe another solution.
If you've never heard of bonder priority, and maybe you're watching these videos for outside of a tournament context, you can check out the game mechanics wiki on Reddit to see details of this hidden but often use full game mechanics. It depends on the numbers that you see on the bonders, determine which bond acts happened before, and so Dariush put them so that the bond would happen in the right order. So we've said everything. We can see it run at the end.
And
also worth noting that in the previous puzzle, I think week 3B, Darius H had lost to DariusOne by 1 cycle, and in this case, Darius H beat DariusOne by 1 symbol. It's the big competition.
Wow. Battle of the Dariuses.
Yeah, they are very close in standing, and pretty close in many puzzles.
Darius H gets 30 symbols, 1 better than DariusOne, and 2nd place. In 1st place is Andy, who got 1st place last time. And here is Binky to explain his solution.
Yeah, so the technique used here is very similar to the technique we saw in brookieoz solution earlier. And there is just a much more efficient way of routing everything such that it doesn't take extra symbols. The inputs are fused in via rotation. If they are to be added to the waste stick, the waste is handled with a U-shaped bond fuse grab drop that behaves whether you need to add a new atom to it or not. And then Blue's shopping spree for the correct atom will avoid having to count to 6 by oxygen sensing away the 2 times that it needs to. It's using the sensor underneath the bottom to pull for carbon after an oxygen trips it up into there to avoid needing to count to 6, meaning it's a very clean 4-count flip-flop instead. You can see that it also has the 2 different oxygen sensors on the wall, one which is in the, not sensors, I mean the commands, one which is triggered in the output case and one which is triggered in the no output case. And the fact that they converge to a path that doesn't require adding any new arrows is very symbol efficient. Yeah, this builds a Rutherfordium stick eventually without needing to sense for Rutherfordium, just based on the fact that it doesn't bond any, or it doesn't fuse anymore if it's at the max number. So let's run it a little bit to see how close that stick gets to the output. But the mechanisms here are just a very good approach implemented extremely efficiently, and there's nothing too much more to say about it because Andy has shown us how it's done, as he tends to do.
Here's our Rutherfordium. And here comes an unliked oxygen. And what happens here?
When it bonds, it does not break that bond with a fuse.
The fuse doesn't work. And grab and drop. And let's go watch it.
This is incredibly efficient. You would think that there's not a single wasted symbol.
You would think.
However,
don't spoil it. That's called foreshadowing, guys.
So we mentioned also that this is very similar to Brookie's approach.
Shh, foreshadowing.
It's relevant.
Okay, let's watch this a little faster.
Yeah, I really like the oxygen sensor underneath the bonders, which can tell you to skip having to count to 6 and shortcut 2 of them to make a 4 count. That little bit of insight is, I think, one of the best efficiencies in the solution that saves symbols over what Brookie had done.
Okay, we'll run it at this speed because, well, winning solution.
Yeah, he has to build the molecule on the last column, because here we see the Rutherfordium gets pretty close to the molecule. It's actually very close.
At 48.
This is already cadmium, and I don't think he can do 11. As you see, this is already
Just waiting
64.
for the carbon. He's already at halfium. He's already at
I mean,
mercury.
this is just fake. This is just fake. We know we can do it.
Yeah, we know he can do it. I'm just seeing how close he gets. And here's our carbon at 96.
It would have been a single extra waste atom, and then Rutherfordium would be that.
Yeah.
This is just the
And
perfect timed solution, and it manages to hit its output before any new waste is added.
for 28 symbols, 2 better than Darius H's 30 symbol solution. And Andy gets our first place.
Yeah, the distancing is pretty big. This is over one metric point over. Sorry, one score point over Dariush. That is pretty big for the symbols puzzle.
Yeah, let's go take a look at the sidebar change for just one moment. Darius H got 10.920 points, and he gets the perfect 12. That means he beat him by just over 1 point. That's really impressive.
This is a symbols blowout.
Yeah. That was the number one scoring solution. You think it would be the best possible, but you'd be wrong. Because brookieoz looked at Andy's solution and said, I can do better. And here it is. It's a non-scoring solution, and Binky's going to explain it to us.
Yeah, so where we had seen Andy make the savings is mostly with that oxygen diversion to prevent it from having to count to 6. And the reason that Brookie had saved symbols over this is the fact that there's one extra arrow needed to stall everything on the top wall. But if you stall everything on the left wall, you can divert into the grab without 2 different rotates, and that makes it much faster. Not faster, I mean, much lower symbols. And so this is doing the exact same thing with red, except for the fact that there's one extra cycle before the rotation. And instead, blue is, after a bond and drop, it's continuing in a straight line to the counter instead of turning left, allowing it to stall on the left wall instead of the top wall and get to the grab with 1 fewer arrow. Everything else about this is exactly the logic of Andy's solution, including the fact that it has to build on the furthest column because of the Rutherford stick. But 1 extra arrow is apparently present in this blowout winner, and Brookie was able to find and reduce that. So
Nice.
well done to Brookie, well done to Andy again for the initial idea. This is a culmination of efforts from lots of people.
And let's watch that Rutherfordian get so close.
Now, I guess because it visits the bottom right corner as closely as it does, this is a slower solution, but not even by that much. I think it was 2800 to now 3100. The
Yeah, I mean,
algorithm that Andy's using is amazing.
Red just got an extra 2 cycles, but it was already pretty long. So you can tell by looking at the red path, and it is like 2 longer.
I see. That's actually the reason. Cool.
Yeah, because red is the clock. I mean, there is not even extra latency on blue. Red is just red is the clock of this solution.
I can imagine that it would fail because of blue being late to a wall sensor and kind of conflicting on a grab, but maybe that's the reason that red had to be made longer.
Yeah, that's the reason. They conflict on the grab.
Gotcha. And here, Rexkix has paused exactly before the results screen. Good pause.
Yeah.
And 27 symbols for Brookie. Too bad he didn't see this before the submission time. It's too bad he didn't see Andy's solution before submission time. Because,
The most terrifying idea would be if teams were open to everyone and Brookie and Andy could team up.
Oh, no. That would
Fine.
Fortunately, teams are disallowed for the top 6.
There is a reason the teaming is disallowed. Otherwise, we will see terrifying teams.
Otherwise, we would see a single team of everybody just working together. That way, everybody wins.
Yeah, I would be on the winning team.
We have another non-scoring solution, and it's done by Binky, and he's here to explain it. Here we go, Binky.
So for this week, I was away for pretty much the entire week, and the only chance I had to properly work on the solution was from about half an hour before the deadline. And unfortunately, I managed to submit this 20 minutes after the deadline, so it's an on-scoring submission. It's very similar to ToughThought's solution, except mine uses sinks, and obviously it's a lot less efficient. Because it was very much a rush job, it is not at all optimized. It's pretty trivial to get this down to 50 symbols and around 4,000 cycles. But for the most part, it's very similar to the methods that's already been used for the conveyor belt style
So
buffer of
it
inputs.
has 5 inputs and it's grabbing them in the C and then N and then O order.
And how did you get the 5 inputs? How did you count to 5? Is that all down here?
Yeah, it's just because the number of grab drops in the circuit. Oh, the startup, yeah.
Oh, this is
The
a 4
startup
site
has,
counter, and this is the 5th.
yeah.
Yeah, just based on the number of sinks.
It's like I said, it's
Yeah, sinks here at least help a lot in terms of solving it because you don't have to think about timing and race conditions, but you do end up putting all these sink symbols down and building your paths around them, and that gets a little ugly.
yeah.
But for getting a solution cranked out in 50 minutes when it could have been a solved solution if it was only 30, man, that was such a tight time that you gave.
Yeah. I was sort of I had obviously the idea for this sort of buffer going on before I actually started working on it, and my plan was to sort of do a method with sinks and then see if I can figure out how to do it without. But obviously, cutting it so close to the deadline, I didn't really have a chance to try anything more than that. And with ToughThought's solution that already did that, it was kind of redundant to try and make my own solution when that's already been released. So I just sort of submitted this just so I could say that I actually did submit something to every round in the competition, even if it wasn't a point scoring one.
And
Are those bonders in the middle used at all?
No, those are just the default starting place for the bonders.
All right, so
They,
no bonding, no bonding except the top, and then no splitter or fuser. This is a very resource light in terms of reactors, nice things solution.
it's just the sensor at the top middle, sensor at the bottom right, and the 2 bonders.
and here's where your
Oh,
output sensor is.
yeah. I will say that I did do a little bit of optimization in that I started off with a full loop of grab drops and just removed them until it stopped working. But that was just sort of like a quick, right, get those out, go, yep, out, go, yep, that's done, send it in. 20 minutes later, I could have just waited on it longer, but oh well.
Why is
Gives
there
me a chance to
12 grab
There are
actually open
12
up.
grab drops, but there's only 5 pieces being shuffled, so I suppose you only would need 9 of them. But can and cannot be got rid of.
The issue came from the gap between the first and last inputs onto the loop, I think. And um, as inputs were taken off this loop, it would leave a gap that was differently sized depending where it's taken out. So having fewer grab drops means that that gap occasionally shrank to 0 until the atoms would crash.
Very interesting. So that makes it feel a lot luckier that this worked at all.
Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, the very quick sort of clean up, like put the blue path down to like a much narrower square, got rid of the zigzag in the middle on the red path, tidied up the red startup and all that sort of stuff, and is down to 50 symbols.
Nice. Well, let's run this to completion. And there it is. Binky had 63 symbols and 7553 cycles. It's really a pity you couldn't make it last week. Um, I always love your solutions, Binky.
Thank you.
Anyhow, next on scoring solution is by Biggie Mac, and he's here to explain it to us. Let's go.
Yeah, so in previous conveyor belt shuffling solutions, I mentioned that if you have 5 inputs, you can guarantee that you can grab a CHC or HCH and then an N and then an O. So you can grab it in the order that you need to build it. But I also mentioned that I wrote down all the inputs in order and found that you could get away with shuffling only 4, but you would have to grab in an inconvenient order. So here's the submission that I worked on for a while before realizing I could beat it by a lot, which grabbed N first, and then O, and no, N and then C and then O, which means that I have to create the output in a slightly different order. In this case, it's with this awkward like H chair bond, and then I build the output narrow, so it's actually filling the width of this, and this would fit in a 4x4 output zone instead of needing the entire 4x8 output zone.
Wow.
So it has a lot of the same properties in common with the
That went fast.
with the conveyor belt made by ToughTought and the previous one by Binky, but mine has a much more obnoxiously complicated assembly for the input to the output because it's grabbing them in an order that doesn't just bond in a straight line. I also am using 8 grab drops on blue instead of 7. I wasn't able to find a way to make 7 not crash just because of the ways the input is supposed to be timed. I did work on it again recently and managed to make a version of this that had fewer symbols, but it didn't build it in this nice compact way, and so I didn't feel like it was worth sharing, especially because it was after the deadline.
And
but yeah,
here is the uniquely formed output.
Yep. It is isomorphic to the aminomethane ether that is asked for, despite being crammed into a much smaller left to right package.
Okay, well that's really interesting. We didn't see anything like this. And let's run it a little faster.
I think it was something a shape I considered making, not for the space convenience, but just because when I'm thinking of solutions, I just try and think of how many shapes that I can put them in and see if it would be possible. But I felt that this one was a little bit too unevenly bonded together to justify building. But I guess in this case, it's
as presented is pretty on the nose. Like if you just have the right piece, you can always bond drop, and it's very easy to continue building.
yeah.
Anything else requires a lot of special casing, and that becomes a little more thinky.
Okay. And
so also, unlike the ones that were using 5, I wasn't able to sense for the first oxygen to be the exit condition for my loop. I instead have Red's initial loop just be this giant box that reuses one of the N-alphas and escapes once it sees a carbon hit the sensor.
Is that this? No.
It's the giant box that starts with the red start.
Where is the red star? I don't see it because it's running.
It's in the input alpha zone.
There we are.
It's
this
a box that just, and it escapes from that the carbon sensor on the bottom.
Ah. Okay.
That box only runs during the first loading the buffer.
Interesting.
I spent a little too long on the solution for how bad it ended up being symbols-wise comparatively. And I know it kind of probably hurt IEEE to watch me keep plugging away at this idea when it didn't bear any fruit. But I regret nothing.
43 symbols beat my solution by a fair margin. So I have respect for it.
Why make an inferior version to somebody else's solution when you can make a still not great solution, but at least it's unique?
It's mine and I made it.
Exactly.
Very good. And as I said, 43 symbols, 2983 cycles. That's Biggie Mac's non-scoring solution. Our final non-scoring solution is by, yes, Andy, and he's made a one Waldo solution. IEEE's here to explain it to us.
Yeah, this uses part. A part is similar to the other solution by Andy. In particular, it is extremely efficient handling of waste with a U bond and fuse. We use waste block. What is different is the way he decides when to build a certain monomer, because contrary to other solutions that make an oxygen and then build what they need, Andy went with a similar algorithm to his other one solution that senses what he wants. And the difficult thing it's actually knowing what monomer do you want. To do that, he has a sensor under the input and a sensor under the most recently outputted monomer. And he basically has, if we see on the bottom, the combination of the combinations of sensing that are allowed. So when you have an allowed combination, when you have a correct monomer on the right and the correct monomer on the left. So there are a few of these paths that result in getting a new input, and all the other one that result in not getting a new input and just trashing it. So we can see right here we have a nitrogen are looking for a carbon. So we hit the nitrogen sensor before the input. We input it and then hit the carbon sensor, and this sent the Waldo through a path that will get the next input. Now, as you can see, we have a carbon sitting on the sensor, so we're looking for oxygen. And looking for oxygen is done on the sensor on the right. You don't need an extra sensor there because you already know it's carbon. And we found it, so we go down. Now we have an oxygen sitting on the sensor, so the oxygen path is active. We got the carbon, that was not the right one, so we trash it. Look again, and so on. As you see, there is a nitrogen sensor after the oxygen. That is what we are looking for. And here it is. We go there, we bond it. And so we do this for all the monomers we need. If you see the oxygen path on the right, we will hit it soon. It has a flip-flop so that it can output the completed molecule. And this is a true one Waldo solution. That is clearly a novelty because it is more convenient to use the other Waldo, if nothing else, just to hammer fuse. That is something that can't really hurt. Like in this solution, you could convert the blue Waldo to hammer fuse and would save a symbol, just like doing that. So there is really no reason to use a single Waldo. I also find this not particularly not the kind of solution I would optimize for. I mean, it is very, very symbol heavy, looks pretty complex, and I don't think forcing one Waldo would offer many opportunities. So yeah, I'm satisfied with not encouraging this kind of solutions. Yeah, it is it. This is fairly low symbols for what it does at clocking at 39. Yeah, here we are. We can see it run at completion. It is pretty slow, but this is to be expected when Waldo does practically everything. No, without practically, really everything.
This is literally everything. So I'm impressed at how he got around the fact that the sensors are an OR, because sure, if you have a carbon on the monomer and a nitrogen on the input, that's correct, but a nitrogen on the monomer and a carbon on the input is incorrect, or actually vice versa of that. So the reason that he has to have input alpha after already sensing the first of the two to get around that it's X and then Y and not just X or Y.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you would get VR and don't know if the order was right.
So yeah, the amount of extra symbols needed to implement AND on the sensors that naturally provide OR.
Yeah, it's not really AND, it's one and another, but yeah, I get your point. Here we go.
It just barely sneaks around its waste stick.
Yeah, like the other solution.
Yep.
Yeah, just like the other
We
one.
need to find an oxygen. So
There.
this is
Yep, there we
so
are.
this is even worse than the other one because you have to wait for the oxygen. So he had another waste, and then it was all Rutherfordium.
Oh, that would have been dangerous. Anyhow,
Yeah.
Andy made a one Waldo solution with 39 symbols, runs 6283, and gets our last non-scoring solution. Now here are the results for round 4. In 10th place we had Gigs. In 9th place we have Anningmay. Counterpoint got 8 points and Sir got 7th. ToughTought at 6th and brookieoz at 5th. In 4th place we had rezoons. 3rd place was DariusOne and 2nd place was Dariush. And Andy got 1st place. The current standings of the tournament are these. Biggie Mac has 10th place. Hey, Biggie.
Woohoo!
Gigs is at 9th place. Noeuchar at 8th. Rezoons at 7th and ToughTought at 6th. brookieoz is at 5th place. Dariush at 4th. Sir, our previous leader, is now at 3rd place. DariusOne at 2nd place. And, yes, Andy again at 1st place with 2 wins in the tournament so far. Thank you all for watching this video. This has been Rexkix narrating it with IEEE and Binky and Biggie Mac doing the commentary, and great commentary it was. Thank you very much. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.